Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Water Wednesday. I'm Dr. Tiffany Boyd Hodgson, candidate for Vallecitos Water Board, Division 5. I do these broadcasts every Wednesday at 8 p.m. and I'll explain to you a little bit about how the broadcast goes and the purpose of the broadcast. And I'm delighted that I have a guest tonight, and I think you're going to find the content that he presents and talks about very interesting. But before I introduce him, I want to tell you that I'm running for Vallecitos Water Board Division 5. I have a website, tiffanyboydhodgson.com. You may be viewing this from the website at this time. And the way these broadcasts typically work, I try to keep them around 45 minutes. I talk a little bit about the race, the water board, and my candidacy. Then I present a block of content, which tonight I'm going to be joined by a guest. And then I take questions from the public. And my guest has graciously agreed to stick around a little bit of time after he talks about his topic, and so that he can answer your questions too. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. It's always just a little bit clunky to get started, so hang on 1 minute. Okay, so tonight, and just please bear in mind that if you do type in questions while I am sharing my screen, I can't see your questions until I pull my screen down. So tonight, welcome to Water Wednesday. Tonight we have Ray Roberts from the Citizens Climate Lobby on with us. Ray and I have known each other for a few years, and I will introduce him more thoroughly later, but I just want to tee that up. I'm really, really happy to have him. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's going to be talking about the great work that he's doing as far as climate action out in Pittsburgh. And we're also going to talk a lot about fracking. So I hope you can stick around for the full time. Before we get started, the last few times that I've held these Water Wednesdays, I started with a land acknowledgement, and this stemmed from a few weeks ago. I showed a TED Talk by a woman named Kelsey T. Leonard, who is a member of the Shinnecock Nation, and she was challenging people to reconnect with water. And inextricable from the reconnection with water is a reconnection with the land. And inextricable from that is a reconnection or a connection or acknowledgement with the people that came before us. So I always, since that time, I've been starting these broadcasts with a land acknowledgement as a way to just center us and ground us. I try to do it with intentionality, so I will do this now. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of the Luiseno Payum people. Cal State University San Marcos, which is near where I live, and surrounding areas are still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the La Jolla, Pala, Pauma, Pachanga, Rincon, Saboba, Luiseno, and Payum people. It is also important to acknowledge that this land remains the shared space among the Kupang-Kawisham and Kupeño, Kumeyaay, and Ipe peoples. We acknowledge that we are guests on traditional, unceded Luiseno Payum land. So I wanted to share some good news with you. As I often do, I start out the broadcast showing the support that I've gained during this campaign. So I've mentioned that I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. I'm also endorsed by 314 Action, which is a group that endorses scientists who are running for office. I'm also proud to report that I have UA Local 230 of San Diego and Imperial Counties, the Plumbers, Steam Fitters, and HVAC-R union. And I'm really happy about that, because if you've tuned into one of these Water Wednesday broadcasts before, you've heard me talk about how it is something that I desire to do to a way to stimulate our economy and promote education by building a pathway so that our youth that live in San Marcos and surrounding areas can grow up and raise their own families here. And one way to do that is to provide a pipeline for them to become educated in the trades, plumbers, steam fitters, HVAC, and then possibly come to work at. And I am in the process of partnering with other utilities and other industries and agencies to try to figure out how those moving parts would work together. And I think UA Local 230 will be a wonderful resource to help guide that discussion and figure out if we can make that work for our area, build community in that way, and put people back to work and stimulate our economy. And goodness knows that we do need to stimulate our economy with how we're suffering with COVID-19. So as a candidate for Vallecitos Water Board Division 5, this is what you get with me. These are my priorities: affordable, quality, reliable water for you. That is the job of that is one of the two top jobs of the Vallecitos Water District: affordable, quality, reliable water for you. No developer subsidies, no developer money. Currently, there are board members sitting on the board that have taken a lot of money from developers. Those developers have been given breaks. I am not taking any developer money for this campaign, and I do not believe that we should be subsidizing development. I believe that we pay for water and not politics. As I just mentioned, partnering with schools, trades for water operator training to provide good local jobs. That's really important to me. And finally, I am a mom, I am a scientist, and a vote for me is a vote for science, not special interests when making decisions. So if you've seen these broadcasts before, I always show this map just to level set where the district is, and you can determine whether or not you're in my district. So I've highlighted it here. It's this darker green portion here, some landmarks that I've pointed out so that you can get your bearings. Double Peak Park is right here. Twin Oaks Valley Road is one of the boundaries right here. Cal State University is right here. It's not in the division, but it's a large employer and it's a large land. It takes up a lot of land, real estate in our area, so that's one way to orient yourself. I-15 is over here. Escondido is off towards this direction with the arrow. 78 is up here. It forms one of the boundaries. San Marcos High School is within the boundary. It's right here. Lake San Marcos is right here. The boundary is just on the other side of the lake. And then Carlsbad is off in this direction. So I'm running for Division 5. There are 3 seats up for election this cycle: Division 1, Division 4, and Division 5, and I'm running for 5. So I'll take us back to the TED Talk that I referenced earlier with Kelsey T. Leonard. One of the things that she challenged us is to rethink the way that we think about water. And she left us with a couple of challenging questions that I have incorporated into this presentation because I believe they're impactful, and it helps us keep in mind that water is a precious resource. It is a finite resource, and it deserves our attention and our protection. So daily asking yourself, what have I done for the water? What have I done for the water today? It could be something small, could be something big. There are many ways to conserve water. There are many ways to appreciate water. So I encourage you to think about that. Is it teaching your kids? And I use this example almost every time because it's really something that we struggle with in this house, frankly. But teaching your kids not to leave the water running when they brush their teeth. They don't need to have the water running, but for some of us, it's harder to learn that. So that's a lesson that we are teaching and reteaching in our house. And that's a small way that you can impact water conservation. How can you reestablish your connection with the water? Is it reconnecting with nature? Is it recreating on the water? Is it just sort of thinking about ways to conserve? Is it giving money to a cause that preserves water? There are a lot of things that you can do. So I encourage you to think about that as well. Finally, water is life. I believe that, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running for Water Board. We have an obligation to protect and preserve it, not just for our generation now, but for generations to come. And because of climate change, because we live in Southern California where water is scarce and expensive, and we are reliant upon imported water, we need to be very mindful of the decisions we make right now because they will impact years to come, 20 years, 30 years. The decisions that the Vallecitos Water Board makes right now has long-lasting impact and daily impact. So I want you to think about those things too. Are you struggling with your water bill? A lot of folks are. In fact, I found out tonight there are over 1,400 delinquent bills at Vallecitos. There have only been about 48 or 50-ish folks that have applied for the special care program. And so I have been trying to put out this information because if there are that many delinquent bills and only a handful relatively have applied, then maybe that suggests that this information isn't getting out there like it needs to be for the benefit of the people that really need it. So if you are suffering from a financial hardship due to COVID-19, you can call Vallecitos Water District and ask about the special care program. You will need to be, you must be able to provide documentation that your struggle is COVID-19 related. Here is the phone number, ask for customer service, and ask about the special care program. Finally, just really quickly before I introduce Ray, I'm running an aggressive campaign. It's a grassroots campaign, and we need volunteers. We are walking precincts doing no contact lit drops, and that's going really well. Although it's been so hot the last couple of days, it's slowed us down a little bit, but we are undeterred, and we would love to have your help. It's easy to do. You can just take a couple of hours. If you have that time, you can do it in the morning or whenever it suits your schedule or when it's not quite so hot. We need volunteers to do that. We're also text banking and phone banking. Phone banking, some people like to do that, some people don't. Texting, some people like to do that, some people don't. But I could use your help. We are trying to reach as many voters as possible because this is a ballot, a down ballot race. It's at the very bottom, and I've run the analysis between 23 and 27% of people that vote. They don't vote for these down ballot races. So we want to encourage them to do that, vote all the way down the ballot, and vote for me. So if you would like to join our campaign as a volunteer, you can give as much or as little time as you have. We would really appreciate it. I have a website down here. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And if you feel like you want to give a contribution to the campaign, that is very welcome. We're taking small dollar donations, no developer money. And here's how you can do that. This is the website right here, bit.ly/TIF4VWB. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Ray Roberts from the Pennsylvania. He's the co-coordinator of the Citizens Climate Lobby. And just a little bit of background on him and the Citizens Climate Lobby. It was founded, the Pittsburgh chapter was founded in May of 2014. In 2015, he was recruited to become the co-coordinator for Pennsylvania. The chapter has grown to over 600 supporters and a core team of over 40 members. Additionally, there were more chapters started in 3 surrounding congressional districts and the University of Pittsburgh. Ongoing mentoring and strategic guidance is being provided to these chapters and support of the other chapters by Ray. He has led successful lobbying campaigns for Pittsburgh City Council to unanimously co-sponsor and endorse the CCL's carbon fee and dividend policy in 2016, and it was re-endorsed in 2018. He has implemented a scholarship program to expand the Pittsburgh CCL chapter's racial and political party diversity. The success of this effort was shared around the state and led to CCL adopting the same types of scholarship programs nationwide. So, welcome, Ray. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll get started with our discussion. Just give me 1 minute. It just takes a little while for me to flip back over. 1 second.
Well, while you're doing that, Tiffany, thank you for asking me to do this. It's a pleasure to try to help and to inform your campaign at all.
Great, thank you. And I'm so glad that you're here. So just a little bit of background, Ray and I met back in Pennsylvania. We were both fortunate enough to have participated in the Emerge Pennsylvania campaign staff training. And I'm going to brag a little bit about us because that training was very rigorous. And it took a whole weekend. It was a long weekend. We had to stay in a dorm and we had to put together a campaign program for a local candidate. And then there were 12 groups of us and we put together this campaign plan. And then we had to present it at the end and we were pitted against each other, all these 12 groups. And the group that Ray and I and our other colleague Charlotte was in, we won. We won the whole thing. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of pressure, but we did it. So that's how I know Ray. And I'm so happy that you've been able to join me tonight. So we're going to talk about fracking. So just to level set everybody that's watching or everybody that will watch this later, talk a little bit about the fracking process.
Fracking is sometimes called unconventional drilling because most people are familiar with the idea of you drill a well and the pressure underground pushes the oil up or the natural gas up. And fracking is different. Fracking is a very complicated and amazingly water intensive process. It requires about 5 million gallons of water to do one frac for the well. And many of the sites with fracking, they don't just drill. I mean, vertically, they go down in one location. However, there's horizontal drilling. And this kind of blew my mind the first time I learned about it, but they can actually steer the drill bit once it's down at the right depth, and they can drill horizontally. And that drilling horizontally can go as much as a mile. And so they will frequently drill vertically in one place, but have as many as a half dozen spines or, stems in a way coming out of the spine that are going horizontally at the depth where the fracking is to extract the oil or the gas. And this is oil or gas that is not in a freestanding deposit. It is actually locked inside the rock. And so in order for them to get at the oil or the gas, they actually pump down, in addition to these vast amounts of water, they mix in these solvents and detergents and toxic chemicals. And they also use a lot of sand. And what happens is they force these chemicals underground into the frac location, and then they explode it. And that explosion, this chemical explosion underground, causes cracks in the rock. And then those cracks would close up again, except for the fact that they have put such amazing amounts of water and sand in this mixture. And the pressure of the water pushes the sand into these small micro cracks, and that blocks the cracks open, which allows that natural gas or oil that has been locked in the rock to be released. And so that's how fracking takes place. The water is pumped out, and the gas now can be released from where it had been locked in the rock. The water has now been contaminated, not just with the chemicals that they used for the fracking, along, these detergents, these toxic chemicals, but also the salt that naturally occurs in rock, and also the radioactivity. So in Pennsylvania, when fracking takes place, in Pennsylvania, it's almost exclusively for natural gas. And the gas that comes out, along with the water, now has a background radioactive signature that it has absorbed from being so deep in the soil. The other thing about fracking is most conventional oil and gas wells are relatively shallow, and fracking gets at these seams of coal that are so deep that it would be ridiculous to try to get at the coal. So these wells, they go extremely deep, and the danger to the water table does not really come from the fracking process. The problems with the water table typically come from spills, And if you think about it, if even 1 out of 100 fracking operations has a spill, they are spilling some really terrible chemicals. And we know the effects of these chemicals, but we don't know exactly what those chemicals are. In 2001, Dick Cheney, who was vice president at the time, had a secret policy that was enacted and was passed with very little congressional oversight over what was essentially taking these fracking mixtures and claiming that they were proprietary and therefore had to be kept secret. And because they were kept secret, the EPA was unable to regulate them. So the EPA hands were tied about what actually are in these chemical cocktails that they use for fracking. The gas and the water come up. The water can be cleaned, and in some instances, although not in Pennsylvania, in some instances, the water that comes out of the frack wells is pumped back down into the ground in what's called an injection well. And injection wells are what have been linked to frack quakes. So man-made earthquakes, because the water, they have to dispose of this vast volume of contaminated water. And the easiest way for them to do that is to drill a different well, pump it underground, and just put it underneath the water table. And that leads to tectonic plates that now have water causing them to slide. And so Oklahoma has surpassed California for having the most number of earthquakes because of these fracking injection wells. The fracking water that comes out, again, where I live, it has this heavy background signature of radiation after it's been contaminated that way. And so when fracking first came to Pennsylvania, it overwhelmed the regulators, and there were a lot of bad actors in this kind of get-rich-quick mentality. And that led also to corruption and subcontracting of get rid of this brine, this salty water, any way you can. And the subcontractors would take it and they would dispose of it. Sometimes there were instances where people were caught dumping it in the Allegheny River. And I worry about all the times that it must have happened where they didn't get caught. This is the water where my children participate in rowing, and a frequent thing with engineers is to dismiss concerns about radioactivity or to dismiss concerns about the chemical cocktail that gets used with fracking. And the engineers have been trained that the solution to pollution is dilution. So as long as you dilute the toxic or the radioactivity in enough other water, then they're like, oh, no problem. So that's that's a big concern. My kids, and they're in the river when they're rowing, and this is also the source of the water that comes in to the water filtration plant near where I live, the Highland Park Water Filtration Plant. Mm-hmm. And the biggest concern I have isn't necessarily about the chemicals that are in the river water, but the radioactivity, because to my knowledge, there's no way you can get rid of the radioactivity. And that radioactivity is also in the natural gas. So if you are using that natural gas in your homes to cook or to heat, then you are introducing an added component of radioactivity into your house. So
Right.
those are all the concerns that go along with fracking, and there's even still ones that I haven't really touched upon. I was looking up the area where you're at, and it appears that you have a mixture of fracking surrounding you, with a lot of it being involved in oil as well as the natural gas sources. And oil is more lucrative. So when they can extract it this way from these, seams of rock where it would otherwise be trapped, they make more money off of it. But the concern, the disposing of this wastewater it's really worrying, because here in Pennsylvania, one of the things they were doing is they were going out and salting the roads during the winter with it. And they were doing that during the summer for dirt roads in Lancaster, where there's a large Amish population. And the Amish were complaining about the salt causing problems for them and their livestock as far as breathing the dust that now had all this salt in it. So in California, there's all of the instances where this water is being disposed of by using it as irrigation water on crops. And to my mind, that, it's the kind of thing where if you force the companies to dispose of the water in a responsible way, they can do it. It just costs them more. They want to dispose of it in the fastest, cheapest way so that they can make as much profit. And they don't care that they're putting things like arsenic or boron on crop fields if it's in California. And they don't care what the consequences are as far as, any background radiation, disposing of it here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and you bring up some interesting points, because California provides a lot of food to the rest of the nation. And if that's the way that the water is being disposed, that's a concern. That's a concern that everybody should be aware of and concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to go back to the disposal of this water, because I think that's really it's really interesting. And I don't feel like I have a firm understanding of what's the ideal way to dispose of this water. What are there? And I imagine that it's governed by legislation, and the legislation probably differs across the country. But what does it look like to dispose of it properly? And is that being done anywhere that you know of?
Well, sort of. And the reason I say that is because I have concerns about the burning of fossil fuels and the contributing problems of greenhouse gases to climate change. So when the fracking industry, claims that they are so proud of disposing of the fracking water in Pennsylvania the right way, what they are talking about is 90% of the water is being used. They call it recycling the water, but that basically means that they go from one frac well to the next, taking the water that they extract from the one frac well in order to use it in the next frac well. And that is what they tout as the responsible, and it humors me that they're calling it recycling of the water. But I mean, I guess technically it is, but it's, I think the things you really want to watch out for are the bad actors, because, if we were only worried about fracking and the companies that were doing fracking and we could hold them responsible, that's one thing. But the idea of just hiring any subcontractor who has a tanker truck to haul the water away with no questions asked about what you do with the water, then that's where we lose track of being able to hold any kind of accountability to the companies. And they'll simply claim it was their subcontractor who did the bad things with the water, not them. And so that in my mind, is where we lose the ability to keep reins on this and to make sure that, one of the things that has happened, I look to Ohio, the neighbor to Pennsylvania, and they were using injection wells. And that was their method of disposing of the water. And their earthquakes, their frac quakes, started happening. And those frac quakes actually, Pennsylvania's, Pittsburgh is close enough to Ohio that we were feeling the frac quakes here in Pittsburgh from Ohio from the injection wells. So I think you really want to avoid injection wells because, I mean, I would not want to see California have more problems with earthquakes as a result of irresponsible disposal of the fracking wastewater. And they tout the idea, the industry does, they tout the idea that, well, injection wells have been used for decades. And again, technically, that's true. Injection wells have been used. And I grew up in Oklahoma, and injection wells had been used in Oklahoma for decades with no problem. But when fracking really took off, the number of injection wells went from, a relatively small number of a few hundred up to thousands in the span of just a couple of years. And so when you are now, having so many more injection wells, what was something that didn't cause a problem now does. And that would be, if I was living in California, that would be of immense concern to me as far as fracking exploding the number of injection wells as a way to dispose of the frack water cheaply. And then I get my food not just from Pennsylvania farms, but there's food that comes all the way from California. And it is of concern to me that this wastewater is being used on some fields that are growing the food that then is getting shipped to me.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's something that I was not aware of, and that is a real concern. Talk a little bit about how we could transition. And this gets back to your work with CCL, but talk a little bit about how we could transition away from fracking and put our efforts into more green technology. What we could do that would not only be better for the planet but be better for our water. Talk a little bit about that and your work at CCL.
So whenever we're dealing with fossil fuels, we're dealing with the fact that fossil fuels are an extractive source of energy, and it inevitably leads to corruption. So there's a problem with democracy, any instance where you have this kind of get-rich-quick mentality of extracting resources. And in Pennsylvania, the history of the state, it actually goes back to even before the Industrial Revolution, when Penn's Woods, or Pennsylvania, was logged for forestry. All of the lumber that, so many of the trees in the state were cut down that there's only one small stand of old growth forest that I know of in Cook's Forest. So all of the trees around us are younger than, 150, 200 years. But I worry about the corruption of government. When we get into talking about fossil fuels, though, there are all of these externalized costs. They like to privatize the profit and socialize all the costs, so that cleaning up after their messes is the legacy, whether it was the lumber industry or whether it was the coal industry or whether it was the oil industry or now with the fracking. Those legacy costs are the kinds of things that we are going to be having to go in and clean up these messes for the next 100 to 200 years. And the methane that is coming out of these fracking wells, um, you know, the caps on the wells might last 20 to 30, maybe 40 or 50 years, but eventually they degrade. And at that point, the methane just is released into the atmosphere, whatever is leaking out of the ground from these old wells. And that has been a legacy cost that we are paying a very high price for, to go through the state and cap those old wells from the oil industry from 100 years ago. So back to your question, my biggest concern, because this is the existential crisis of our generation, which is climate change. And you don't have to look further than California's wildfires, or the wildfires all the way up and down the West Coast. You are now living with mega fires. And the you know, when I was a teenager in the 80s, the amount of California wildfires, a record-setting year was 200,000 acres. Okay, and it's ludicrous to talk about numbers that small now, because the record-setting years have both been about 3.5 million acres in California, and this wildfire season is far exceeding those. I mean, we are now at 5 million acres burned, and the wildfire season, typically gets worse in October. And so we're not even there yet. So the mega fires in California, it's the climate change costs from burning fossil fuels are ones that we are all paying. We're just not directly making the causal link to, oh, we burn fossil fuels, so now the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are overheating our planet far beyond what it should be. And we are paying those costs with these ridiculous wildfires that are getting worse each year. And the hurricane season, they're running out of letters this hurricane season. So there are going to likely be more named storms than we have letters in the alphabet. And the nature of the hurricanes has changed because of climate change. The storms from the hurricanes, not only are we seeing more hurricanes, but when they are hitting, they are bigger typically, and they are accelerating immediately before they hit land. And again, going back to like the 1980s or the 90s, that was not the way hurricanes used to be. Hurricanes used to, as they would get close to land, they would slow down. Now they're accelerating. Okay. And so those trends are changing everything about, and here in the Northeast in Pennsylvania, we're looking at more extreme rainfall events. That is the number one biggest thing here that we're having to change our infrastructure around, because flooding is now happening so much more frequently with these dangerous 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year floods that are they're not exactly waiting 500 or 100 years or even 50 years. They're happening every year. It's just a question of where. And so climate change is the existential crisis that burning of fossil fuels is. We're paying those costs. And what I would like to see is we should flip that. We should actually charge a fee on pollution from fossil fuels, and the money from that should be coming back to us to help us as we, in every single household in our country, make these transitions.
I think that's a great idea, and I'm glad you shared that with me. And the last time I was in Pennsylvania was last summer, and there was flooding. There was massive flooding, and I know that that's anecdotal, but just in the time we lived there, it seemed like the flooding was increased. And of course, California has different water issues than Pennsylvania, but water is scarce and expensive out here. But I really appreciate you talking about fracking and how it pertains to water and tying it back to climate change, because all of these concerns are tied together. And when you're out here in California and you see the fires burning and you see that the sun is orange and you see that you can't breathe, and there's a haze even down in San Diego, and we haven't been hit with the brunt of the fires. We've had a couple that are nearby, but not like the Bay Area, not like Oregon. But we're still feeling it. And you just mentioned before we went live that you're starting to see some of the haze all the way from our coast. So it's a real concern, and all of these things that we're doing to extract fossil fuels, there's got to be a better way to fuel our economy and fuel our industries, and we need to be focused on that. And that's one of the reasons why I brought you on, because I knew that you would be able to talk very eloquently about it. We do have we got a little bit of time. I try to keep these around 45 minutes, and we're at about the 41-minute mark here. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will answer them. If as the questions come in, we'll answer them. But if no one has any questions, then I usually just sort of end it early. But I'm happy to hear more of your thoughts too while we wait for people to type their questions.
Well, we're already seeing the costs from combining solar, wind, and storage. The costs have come down to the point where it actually makes more sense to invest in clean energy than it does to rely on fossil fuels. The costs of, when I was comparing a conventional well with the fracking well, it's so much more complicated. It's so much more resource intensive. And those things do make it more expensive to drill a frack well. I feel like one of the other pieces that's important to keep in mind also is that these companies, a lot of them are over leveraged and deep in debt. They're the kind of company that if you were looking at a bank, or if you were looking at basically any business and you saw how much debt they were racking up, you would avoid investing your money in them. Mm-hmm. And that's very true of so many of these fracking operations. They are in it to try to get in, get rich, and get out quick, and leave taxpayers, leave society holding the bag as far as cleaning up their mess.
Can you say the line that you said just a few minutes ago? You said something about privatizing the profit and socializing the. Say that again. Say that again. I think that's a really good point.
Extraction industries like oil and gas drilling, they want to privatize the profits and socialize all the costs. Mm-hmm. They want, there are costs associated with protecting groundwater. And, the frack well, when they drill, they are going so deep in order to reach these seams of rock far below the water table that's not the problem of groundwater contamination. The source of groundwater contamination typically comes along if there is a flaw in the concrete casing around the well. And those flaws don't happen very often. It's like a bubble in the concrete, okay? And they work hard to try to avoid having that happen. But again, if it happens in 1 out of 100 times, and there are tens of thousands of those wells here in Pennsylvania, you will have groundwater contamination just from those flaws. But over time, concrete will degrade. And so 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years out, you will see more and more contaminated groundwater. And when I say that, I'm talking about the gas that is, still kind of percolating up through the well casing. And when it hits one of these breaks in the concrete, that's when it goes out into the groundwater. And that's when, my grandfather in Oklahoma, when I was growing up, he would take a lighter over to his tap water and he'd be able to light it on fire. And that
Mhm.
was from conventional well drilling where the concrete had degraded to the point where the gas, the natural gas, was leaking out into the groundwater. And I'm glad we live when we do, because the water filters that we have now are certainly better than his solution of just letting the water sit for a couple of days. It
Mhm.
was disturbing, and I will never forget seeing him light his tap water on fire. I mean, that's the kind of thing that was shown in the movie Gasland. And again, the thing to remember is those really are the exceptions to the rule, but they do happen.
Mhm.
And as the concrete around these well casings degrades, it's going to happen more and more and more and more over the next century. And those companies, they're going to be gone. They're going to be bankrupt by then. And we as taxpayers, my kids will have to pay to go in and try to surround the old well with a new well in order to drop more concrete around this and try
Mhm.
to cap the well and prevent further leaking of the gas into the groundwater.
Yeah. Well, I bet it made an impression on you that your grandfather did that, and maybe that is what sort of steered you in the direction of what you're doing now. No questions have come in. That's okay. I have enjoyed our chat. I have enjoyed hearing you speak about this, and I've learned a lot. I admittedly didn't know that much about fracking, and I still have some homework to do about fracking in California. But having lived in Pennsylvania and hearing about it in Pennsylvania, it is something that I'm aware of, and it's something that we are going to have to grapple with, we as a society.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly struck by that line that you said, and I appreciate your time. It's great to see you, and yeah, if I have any
Tiffany,
questions, I'm going to call you.
well, well, before we break here, I just wanted to thank you again for having me. And it's been really nice reconnecting with you. And it's reminded me so much of that training, that weekend where I first met you. And I don't think I've told you, but you impressed me so much with your
Oh,
leadership of our team and your attention to the details was impressive. I don't think that I'm a slouch when it comes to paying attention to details
we're
and things,
not.
but you really led our team in a remarkable way, and I am confident that you are going to bring that leadership to Vallecitos and the water board. And I
Thank
am
you.
really you impressed me terribly. Anything I can do to help you win this race, I am happy to do.
Thank you. Well, you have helped me. You've helped me tonight, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. And we're going to sign off. It was great to see you. And I have a lot of homework to do about fracking, and I can thank you for that. So I'm grateful. Thank you, Ray.
Okay.
We'll see you soon.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Okay.
Be
Good
safe.
night.
Wear a mask.